Behind iron gates, overgrown driveways, and boarded-up windows across America sit mansions that were once symbols of wealth, power, and influence, but today stand silent, sealed off, and largely forgotten. And what makes them unsettling isn't abandonment itself, but what was never meant to be found again. These weren't ordinary homes. They were built to impress, to isolate, and in some cases to conceal. And long after their owners vanished or passed on, pieces of their stories were left behind without explanation. This is Unseen Truth Stories, and in this video we're exploring the mysteries hidden inside America's abandoned mansions. Places where entire lives unfolded behind closed doors and then stopped abruptly, leaving questions locked inside the walls. In some cases, the truth didn't disappear. It was deliberately sealed behind locked rooms, missing records, and doors that were never reopened. What makes these places unsettling isn't just decay or age, but the sense that certain chapters were intentionally erased, while others were left frozen in time. As we move through these mansions and the stories tied to them, one uncomfortable idea keeps resurfacing. When wealth, privacy, and power intersect, history doesn't always fade away. It gets hidden, waiting quietly in spaces no one expected to return to. One of the most unsettling abandoned mansions in America sits quietly behind rusted gates and overgrown trees, and what immediately sets it apart isn't its size or decay, but the fact that entire sections of the house were deliberately sealed long before anyone realized it had been abandoned. Built in the early 1900s by a wealthy industrialist who made his fortune during America's rapid expansion, the mansion was designed with privacy in mind, custom locks, restricted wings, and floor plans that separated living spaces in ways that made oversight nearly impossible. At first, life inside the home appeared structured and controlled, with staff maintaining strict routines and guests coming and going under clear rules, but over time, something shifted. Neighbors later recalled that activity didn't stop suddenly. It thinned out in stages, with fewer visitors, fewer deliveries, and certain windows staying dark permanently, raising the first quiet question of why parts of the mansion were being abandoned while the rest remained occupied. That question grew heavier when longtime staff began leaving one by one, not replaced, and doors inside the mansion were locked from the inside and never reopened. When the owner died under circumstances that were never fully clarified in public records, the situation worsened instead of resolving, because no clear instructions for the property were found, and legal disputes over the estate stalled access indefinitely. As years passed, the mansion sat untouched, guarded not just by distance and decay, but by layers of ownership confusion, restricted access, and missing documentation that prevented inspection or sale. When limited entry was finally granted decades later, investigators and historians were met with a pattern that was impossible to ignore. Entire rooms preserved exactly as they had been left, furniture intact and dust undisturbed, while other sections of the house were completely empty, stripped of personal belongings, records, and even architectural features. Floor plans recovered from archives didn't match the structure that still stood. Staircases led to locked doors for which no keys were ever recovered. Correspondence referenced wings and rooms that no longer existed, with no permits or records explaining their removal. Attempts to trace what had been sealed, removed, or altered ran into dead ends, documents were missing, legal files were incomplete, and access to certain areas was permanently restricted due to ownership clauses that survived long after the property itself had been abandoned. What made the situation more disturbing wasn't evidence of a single crime or dramatic event, but the consistency of omission. The way every attempt to understand why the mansion was shut down led to another locked barrier. Even today, large portions of the house remain undocumented, and one interior wing, visible on the original blueprints, has never been opened, leaving behind a physical reminder that whatever was meant to stay hidden wasn't lost to time, but deliberately closed off and left exactly where it was. Another abandoned mansion tells a different kind of story, one where the mystery isn't about what was sealed away, but about what was inexplicably left behind. Because when access was finally granted years after the property had been vacated, investigators found dining tables still set for meals. That never happened. Wardrobes filled with carefully arranged clothing and calendars marked weeks beyond the last confirmed day anyone lived there. The estate itself sat just far enough off a once prominent roadway to avoid casual attention, hidden behind trees that slowly reclaimed the grounds. And it had belonged to a prominent family whose name appeared regularly in local newspapers for decades, tied to business ventures, charity events, and social influence. When the mansion was abruptly vacated in the mid-20th century, the assumption at the time was simple and unremarkable. The family had moved on, as wealthy families often did, leaving behind a property that was expensive to maintain and inconvenient to modernize. But as years passed and the mansion remained untouched, that explanation began to feel increasingly insufficient, because unlike most abandoned homes, this one showed no evidence of preparation for departure. There were no packing crates, no cleared rooms, no records of a sale or transfer, and no correspondence suggesting a planned relocation. Instead, the interior suggested interruption rather than conclusion, children's belongings left in place, handwritten notes positioned where they would have been read the next morning, and personal letters stacked neatly in drawers as if meant to be revisited. When historians and officials attempted to reconstruct the final days of occupancy, the timeline resisted clarity at every turn. Utility services were not formally canceled but shut down irregularly, sometimes weeks apart, suggesting hesitation rather than decisiveness. Financial records did not indicate a clean transition, ending abruptly without documentation of closure or transfer. Legal filings referenced internal disputes and unresolved matters, but failed to establish when the household truly stopped functioning or why no formal exit was recorded. Attempts to trace the family's movements after leaving the mansion led to sealed probate files, conflicting accounts from distant relatives, and missing documentation that prevented any single narrative from forming. As decades passed, the mansion became less a relic of wealth and more a snapshot of suspended time, its rooms preserving the rhythm of daily life without the people who created it. What unsettled researchers most was not decay, but order, the sense that everything had been left with the expectation of return. Even now, large portions of the property remain inaccessible due to unresolved ownership and structural concerns, leaving significant areas undocumented and unexplored. In one upstairs bedroom, a wall calendar still hangs open to a date that never arrived, its pages yellowed but untouched, marking the precise point where routine stopped, plans were abandoned, and no official record ever explained why no one came back to finish what was left behind. Another abandoned mansion carries a different kind of unease, one that doesn't announce itself through decay or spectacle, but through restriction, because even decades after it was vacated, entire records tied to the property remain sealed, and one interior wing has never been officially opened. The estate once belonged to a reclusive yet powerful figure whose wealth allowed for privacy on a scale few people ever experience. A sprawling mansion set far back from public roads, designed not just for comfort, but for control over what could be seen and known. For years, the property operated quietly and efficiently. Staff maintained the grounds, deliveries arrived on schedule, and movement in and out followed predictable patterns. Then, without any public explanation, those patterns began to fracture. Local residents later recalled that activity didn't stop all at once. Lights went dark room by room, vehicles appeared less frequently, and entire sections of the grounds were closed off without notice, raising early questions that were never addressed. What followed was not a dramatic abandonment, but a gradual withdrawal that left behind more confusion than clarity. Employment records ended abruptly without termination notices. Maintenance logs stopped mid-year with no replacement entries. Financial documentation showed continuity in ownership, but no indication of active use. When officials attempted to reconstruct what had happened, they encountered the first signs of resistance rather than absence. Former staff members offered conflicting accounts of when the last full household was present, some insisting the mansion was still partially occupied long after others claimed it had been emptied. Requests to access certain records were denied or delayed due to confidentiality agreements that remained enforceable long after the property itself had fallen into disrepair. As years passed, attempts to formally reopen inquiries ran into jurisdictional barriers, sealed legal arrangements, and procedural closures that prevented further inspection without clear justification. Inspections were requested and denied. Files were referenced but never produced. Ownership disputes lingered without resolution, effectively freezing the property in a legal limbo that discouraged deeper investigation. What made the situation more unsettling wasn't the absence of a single explanation, but the pattern of obstruction that surrounded every attempt to obtain one. Even today, large portions of the mansion remain inaccessible, not because of structural collapse alone, but because permissions were never granted and documentation was never released. In the lower wing of the house, behind a reinforced door listed on original blueprints but absent from later records, a locked room remains unopened, its contents undocumented and its purpose officially unrecorded. Standing as a physical reminder that some stories aren't lost to time, they're stopped, restricted, and left exactly where they were. One abandoned mansion stands apart from the others not because it was sealed or frozen in time, but because long after it was officially declared empty and inactive, someone had clearly been there. The estate belonged to a powerful family whose influence stretched far beyond the region, and when the property was vacated under vaguely documented circumstances, officials recorded the departure as routine, listing no need for continued oversight. For years, the mansion sat behind locked gates and overgrown hedges, its abandonment accepted without scrutiny, until a later inspection, prompted by structural concerns rather than curiosity, revealed something that shouldn't have been possible. Portions of the interior showed signs of deliberate upkeep, dust cleared from surfaces, fixtures still functional, and furniture arranged as if certain rooms were being preserved while the rest of the house decayed around them. This discovery immediately fractured the official timeline, because according to records, no one had legal access to the property for years. Efforts to reconcile this contradiction ran into the familiar wall of bureaucracy, access logs were incomplete, security reports were missing, oversight passed quietly between agencies, and responsibility dissolved without resolution. But what made this case different was that the obstruction wasn't the mystery itself. It was merely the background noise to something far more unsettling. As investigators moved deeper into the mansion, they noticed the preservation wasn't random. Specific rooms showed repeated signs of maintenance, while adjacent spaces were left to collapse, creating sharp lines between neglect and care. Storage areas contained personal effects that should have been removed during the original closure, documents, clothing, and household items dated well beyond the supposed abandonment, suggesting not a single return, but sustained presence over time. The pattern raised a far more disturbing question, not who had access, but why only certain spaces mattered. Former employees denied involvement, contractors reported limited access, and no authority could explain how selective upkeep had occurred without authorization. As the inquiry narrowed, it became clear that this wasn't a case of trespass or oversight, but intent. Someone had chosen what to preserve and what to let disappear. Behind one reinforced interior door, a room remained in stark contradiction to the rest of the house, its condition markedly more recent than its surroundings, untouched by the decay that consumed the estate. The door itself was intact, secured, and undocumented in later records, standing as physical proof that the mansion was not simply abandoned and forgotten. It was curated. And that room, still sealed and unexplained, leaves behind a question that refuses to fade. If no one was supposed to be there, who decided what was worth keeping? And why was that decision never recorded? The final abandoned mansion brings all of these threads together: wealth, isolation, control, and silence. But adds one final, deeply unsettling element: there was never an official moment where the story ended at all. The estate belonged to an influential figure whose life was meticulously documented in public records, business dealings, and media coverage, yet the fate of the mansion itself slipped into a kind of administrative limbo that no one ever fully resolved. For years, the property functioned as expected, hosting private meetings, extended stays by associates, and carefully managed staff operations, all shielded from public view by distance, non-disclosure agreements, and layered security. Then, activity slowed, not abruptly enough to raise alarm, but gradually enough that the absence of a clear ending went unnoticed. Staff were released in phases. Deliveries stopped without formal cancellation. Utilities remained active in limited sections while other areas went dark, creating a staggered shutdown that never produced a definitive closure date. When the owner later disappeared from public life, without a clear announcement, retirement statement, or recorded relocation, the mansion followed the same pattern, existing without explanation rather than being formally vacated. Attempts to clarify ownership and status produced contradictory answers. Some records listed the estate as active but unoccupied, others as inactive but privately maintained, and still others failed to list it at all. Over time, responsibility for oversight shifted between agencies and private trustees, each assuming the other held authority, which resulted in no inspections, no inventories, and no comprehensive documentation of what remained inside. When partial access was eventually granted years later, investigators found a mansion that reflected this unresolved state. Rooms that appeared untouched since the last period of use, offices containing files that ended mid-year, and personal effects arranged in ways that suggested routine had paused rather than concluded. Unlike the other mansions, there were no dramatic discoveries or obvious signs of concealment, just the persistent absence of a final chapter. Requests to review sealed documents related to the estate were denied or deferred, not due to active obstruction, but because no single entity could confirm jurisdiction. As the years passed, the mansion's unresolved status became its defining feature, a place that technically existed without conclusion, protected not by secrecy alone, but by ambiguity. Even today, portions of the estate remain inaccessible, not because anyone is actively hiding them, but because no one ever took responsibility for deciding what should happen next. The mansion stands as a quiet endpoint to these stories, reminding us that sometimes mysteries aren't hidden behind locked doors or sealed rooms, but suspended in uncertainty, left unresolved, because no one ever formally closed the door at all. When you step back and look at these mansions together, what makes them unsettling isn't decay, rumors, or the passage of time, but the patterns that repeat quietly across every story: control without transparency, privacy without accountability, and histories that were allowed to stop without explanation. These homes weren't abandoned because they lost value or relevance. They were left behind with questions still inside them: sealed rooms, missing records, preserved spaces, and timelines that never reached a clear ending. Each mansion shows a different way truth can disappear, not through destruction, but through silence, omission, and deliberate inaction, until the absence of answers becomes the story itself. What lingers isn't fear, but discomfort, because these places force us to confront how easily wealth and influence can create spaces where normal rules no longer apply, and how entire chapters of history can be quietly set aside. If one of these stories stayed with you longer than the others, let us know in the comments and tell us where you're watching from, because these mysteries aren't confined to one region or era. They're scattered across the country in places most people never get to see. And if you want to keep exploring stories that unfold slowly, leave questions behind, and reveal what happens when truth is locked away instead of erased, consider subscribing to Unseen Truth Stories, where we take time with the histories that were never meant to be revisited.